and welcome to part 5 of the Battle of Trafalgar and the campaign's conclusion. Now, the thing is, slapstick can't go on forever. And as much as we might like it to, it can't go on forever. And luck does run out. As much as actually factoring in luck into your selection process of officers, and I'm not sure how you could do that. Please, ideas for how you factor in luck into the selection of officers in the comments below. At certain points, you have to rely on staff work and logic and persistence. It's one of these reasons why whenever I see books which say geniuses of war and the geniuses of war who sorted this out, or the Second World War, or another thing, I sit there and go, are they actually geniuses, or are they just good at the job? They've been trained by good officers, they know how to think, they know how to approach it. Because one of the problems for Nelson in trying to track down Villeneuve is that Nelson is good at his job, and therefore can't really put his mind in thought process in the place of someone who isn't as good at his job. That's the other sort of side of the coin. If Gravina had been in charge, because if Gravina's in charge, then you have the issue that he probably would try and do the sensible, the things that a trained and experienced officer would do. And actually, that might be actually easier for Nelson to predict. There's also the fact that if Gravina had been in charge, he would have probably ignored several of Napoleon's instructions and have gone with delivering the oeuvre of the idea rather than the letter of the idea. Whereas Villeneuve kept trying to deliver the letter of the idea. Which means you might have ended up with a fleet in Brest. Which would have been interesting supporting a fleet in Brest, because you're going to have to get food and water and all sorts of things from elsewhere. It's already had diseases in the past because it's not exactly the most sanitary place in the 1700s, let alone the 1800s. Yeah, it's not where I would like to gather a fleet. Interesting enough, if I'd been Napoleon setting my meeting point, I'd have said Quiberon Bay. But there again, that is of course the bay where Hawke had won his victory. So maybe the French were avoiding that bay because they hadn't really secured it that much better since then. But honestly, they'd probably had more chance there. As it was, what do we have going on in the world? Well, these things rarely happen in isolation. And as I've said many times on previous videos, I am currently not acting in isolation at the moment myself. I currently have a familial bragging rights competition, which involves a photograph of my aunt and uncle wearing Blackburn face masks. To be done if I get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st, 2021. So, if you do like my shows, do like them, and would like me to win this family bragging rights competition, please share, please like, because there's no chance I'm doing it without your help. Anyway, so what happens after Finisterre? Well, about the same time as Finisterre is going on, the Allemand Rochefort squadron had actually sailed out. They have 5 ships of the line and 2 frigates and 2 corvettes. They never managed to join up with the fleet. They never managed to do anything. We can think about how useful they might have been at the Battle of Trafalgar itself, because Battle of Trafalgar, they would have given the combined fleet 38 ships of the line versus Nelson's 27. Now, you have to admit, though, and Nelson would have probably got the intelligence, and the Royal Navy was adjusting the fleets. They had, of course, Africa coming down. but more ships would have probably been sent down if they realised the squadron was there. Because actually, here's one interesting thing. This squadron's out hunting. They know it is. They have squadrons out hunting this fleet. And that's going to be interesting for the Battle of Cape Ortegal, which takes place after Trafalgar, where it's a group which is supposed to be out hunting this squadron, finds survivors from the Battle of Trafalgar, and takes them all. So the Royal Navy has ships going around. Okay, you have to. Just because they have 27 versus 33, okay, they'd have liked more than 27, and they were sending more. But there's also a reflection of the fact they're dealing with, they've got have groups out hunting for other squadrons. If this squadron is all in one place with Villeneuve, then the Royal Navy would have focused on this squadron being in one place, and the groups which went out hunting it, which would have possibly been about another 10 ships, 8 to 10 ships in line, could well have ended up, because there were two groups, could well have ended up joining with Nelson. One of those groups was kept closer to the Channel Fleet, and one was hunting further afield. So maybe just 5. But it would have been interesting. It would have also given probably the future Rear Admiral, at that point Commodore Strachan, to Nelson, which would have been a nice addition to his fleet. And also, you have to remember, the Royal Navy was actually counting on him having 28 ships. They didn't realise that Calder would take home Prince of Wales. They didn't think any admiral, and this is half the problem that comes up with Calder, is that they thought he would come home in a frigate. Then they'd sort it out, and it'll be sorted out nicely. He demands to come home in his flagship, which means he brings home his second-rate HMS Prince of Wales, which means a very useful ship was not at Trafalgar. You add in another second-rate to the fighting line, you have a lot more firepower. This squadron, they're sailing around, and they're part of the background of what's going on during the Trafalgar campaign. They miss the enemy convoy they're hunting. And the reason they miss the convoy they're hunting is the convoy is being escorted by a couple of ships of the line. And they take the convoy, HMS Calcutta, a 4th-rate ship of the line, goes ahead to act as heavy scout, basically. Sees them. Knows it can't win. It's fighting 5 ships of the line, 2 frigates and 2 corvettes. There is not a chance of it to win. These are 3rd-rates and far more powerful ships than it. So it draws them off. It does a fighting retreat, and it keeps them busy for days. And by the time they're back on station, the convoy has passed through where they were hunting. So the Royal Navy loses a 4th-rate. But they're not too upset, because they got the convoy through, and that matters more. And the reason that group is out hunting is because the frigate sent to collect them, Didon, the one which has sent the orders and to pass on and tell them to hook up with Villeneuve, well, she's captured by HMS Phoenix, which had been one of the frigates, of course, who had been responsible for watching Villeneuve in Toulon. That'd been one of Nelson's frigates there. And now she's back elsewhere, taking out Didon, which, of course, famously had taken had taken dispatches across to Villeneuve in the East Indies. No, West Indies, yeah. Taking them all the way across there, and then had come back and was now taking out dispatches to try and track down Armand. Unfortunately, on the 10th of August, she gets spotted. Now, Thomas Baker had been in command of HMS Phoenix since April 1803. He was, by this point in 1805, assigned to the Channel Fleet under Cornwallis, and was part of Cornwallis's group watching Finisterre. Because Cornwallis hadn't trusted Calder to necessarily do his job, so he'd had a couple of his frigates down there watching. Calder was considered a fine admiral. He was an okay admiral. He was a safe pair of hands, but he wasn't considered the best admiral available. But he was better than some of the admirals in the yellow list, in the yellow squadron. And he does eventually get to being admiral, a full admiral of the blue, but he never gets another seagoing appointment after Finisterre. Anyway, Phoenix had her, well, a ruse de guerre had been taken out so that at long range she resembled a sloop of war rather than necessarily a frigate. And when I say frigate, how do I put this? HMS Phoenix is armed with 26 18-pounder guns on the gun deck, 8 9-pounder guns, with 4 18-pounder carronades on the quarterdeck, and 2 9-pounder guns and 4 18-pounder carronades on the forecastle. So she's not exactly the most heaviest armed vessel. And Didon, well, how did I put this about Didon? She is armed with at least an upper deck of 28 18-pounder guns, a gun deck of 28 18-pounder guns, a quarter deck of 6 9-pounder guns, and plus some 6 32-pounder carronades. And a forecastle with 2 9-pounder guns and 2 32-pounder carronades. Actually, no. I think it's up to 6, but usually 2, I think, is that from my notes of Didon's carronades. And that's in British service. In French service, she has a slightly different gun armament, but there is a huge debate over what she's actually armed with in the French. But she's more heavily armed than Phoenix. Anyway. 10th of August, 1805. 2 vessels meet off Cape Finisterre, and Phoenix was able to approach and engage the Didon before the French realized that she was a frigate of equivalent, though not quite as large size as they were. In fact, honestly, they thought she was a far smaller vessel. At 8 a.m., Didon hoisted French colours. Phoenix made no response. She just quietly kept coming closer. It's 9 a.m. when the fighting commenced. Didon opens fire upon Phoenix, which is still coming down, but Phoenix didn't fire back, as Captain Baker intended to pass and engage the leeward of the French ship. So Didon keeps raking the British ship. And Baker decides that he's going to close with his adversary. He decides that, frankly, their fire is not that problematic. He can get close to this ship. He might be able to take her as a prize. That'd be useful, because as well as the ship, you get the dispatches, and she does look like a French dispatch frigate. Anyway, Phoenix ranged up alongside Didon, and at pistol shot range, opens fire. However, even though she's so close, she's still slightly too far to windward and has too much speed. So she draws ahead of the French ship. Didon takes advantage of this by trying to luff across the stern of Phoenix and, again, pouring in a raking broadside. Sounds like she should be going to win. And she then bore up and again rakes Phoenix and was about to do this again, but Baker manages to counteract the movement. At which point, the French crew tried to board, but the Royal Marines aboard Phoenix repel them. And at which point, then there's a little bit more breeze comes around. Didon forges ahead, and Phoenix is brought more guns from Phoenix are able to be brought to bear, and they engage broadside on broadside. And Phoenix's higher rate of fire and far more accurate fire, because of her far more practiced and drilled crews, soon began to tell. The ships separate, and they are about to get back into close fighting when Didon's foremast topples over. This caused more damage to, well, the main mast topples over and the foremast topples over. As you can see in this picture, what happens is the foremast topples and that hits the damaged mainmast, and then you end up with things going into the water. And it's as this painting sort of tries to describe, but really this painting is supposedly after they've been maintaining and trying to fix their prize. The painting in the top is the picture during the battle. Baker had his hat shot off his head at this point, but they carried on fighting. And after Phoenix had lost 12 killed and 28 wounded, and the French 27 killed and 44 wounded, mainly because the British were pouring more fire into the hull of the ship, whereas the French tended to try and fire high. This is caused something interesting because, of course, the British have done all this damage to the Didon's mast and rigging. That had been more thanks to the carronades, which were firing seems to be firing high from the Phoenix than the cannon, which were slamming into the hull. At this point, Didon basically strikes. She's being smashed up, she's being boarded, she is in terrible state, and she strikes her colours. It's the only thing they have left. And so they have got a prize, which has all the instructions for Almond, which stops him joining up with the Franco-Spanish fleet. So this decides in August. That's decided what happens. They have even more fun, though, and even bigger impact, because these two frigates managed to get themselves into sailing order. The Phoenix really trying to, because they want that Didon's going to be a good prize, and she is brought into the Royal Navy, becomes HMS Didon. And they meet up with HMS Dragon, a lovely 74-gun vessel, a third rate. And they are sailing along, and on the 15th of August, they come across the combined fleet sailing under Villeneuve. They were heading for Brest, and then the plan was to go Brest, then on to Boulogne to escort the French invasion forces across the Channel. Of course, the Channel fleet might have had something to say about that, but we'll leave that to one later. Anyway, Villeneuve sees these three ships. He sees a 74, a big one, signalling with two frigates. That looks like a scout group. That looks like a scout group for a major fleet. A fast 74 with two frigates, that's a scout group, right? For a major fleet. That's what Villeneuve convinced himself, especially as he watches them signaling backwards and forwards, as if they're signaling to a fleet over the horizon. And he decides the Channel fleet has come south to attack him. The Channel fleet has come south. They've left Brest, they've come south. And so he flees south again to avoid action. Surprising enough, Napoleon then rages. What a navy, what an admiral. All those sacrifices for naught. The British ships, of course, had originally been sailing for Gibraltar, but after seeing Villeneuve's fleet and running and thinking it was running away but might come back, they actually made to Plymouth instead. And they had some issues on the way. The French prisoners tried to capture Phoenix and retake Didon, but for some reason, Dragon went. Hello, yes, I know. Hello, have you seen me? Yeah, I have lots of Marines and sailors who are coming across right now. I also have all my cannon out. Actually, the Royal Navy sailors aboard the two ships managed to deal with it all before anything happened. But so you have to wonder, very brave but very stupid because they're dealing with two damaged ships anyway. They capture them, they're going to lose their numbers as it is, so they're not going to be able to sail at full efficiency. And there is a shooting great fast 74 sitting there. So you've got a damaged frigate, so you're not going to be able to get away from it by speed. And this thing is just going to come up and go goodbye. And HMS Dragon has. Well, she's taken part in the Battle of Cape Finisterre. She will take part in the Battle of Hampton and the Battle of Fort Peter. But she's another vessel which was very nearly sent to Nelson. Basically, Cornwallis is happily sending as many ships as he can to Nelson's way because he needs Nelson to be strong. He doesn't want the two fleets to unite. That makes him far more problematic. Especially as, in his mind, well, Villeneuve has actually sailed, so he might actually be, I don't know, slightly more of a threat than Gormont. Might be. You never know. So what's going on during this wait? Well, during this wait, between the 10th of August until 20th of October, by the middle of August, the blockade on Cadiz is being run by Rear Admiral the Blue Cuthbert Collingwood, because no one trusts Calder to do it. Collingwood has been sent out to be in charge of Calder. Following hot on his heels and soon there, but not arriving not that long into September, is the boundless energy of Admiral Nelson. It actually arrives on the 27th of September. He's there for roughly 2 weeks before Caldwell decides he's going to go home in early October and requests the honour of taking his flagship home with him to make restitution in court-martial against him for not having done his utmost for the crown and for the nation. The point I often try and make is that we have this idea of French admirals bad, Spanish admirals forgotten, and British admirals good. There's Caldwell. There's Guyena. There is quite a few French admirals who aren't necessarily that bad. It's one of the interesting things is I honestly do wonder if the French had been better served if Rossilli had been put in charge. Because whilst Napoleon might have dismissed him as not having had enough experience, that's mainly because he's not part of that quartet from the Nile. And whilst he certainly doesn't have amazing skills, he's not a superstar, he's probably better than Villeneuve. And definitely not as lucky as Villeneuve, but probably better. And he has some skills. But this is the point made by Napoleon on the 8th of September 1815. If Admiral Villeneuve, instead of entering Ferrol, had contented himself with rallying at the Spanish squadron and had sailed for Brest to join Admiral Ganfou, my army would have landed. It would have been all over with England. Really? Really, Napoleon? I'm sorry, I hate to bust this on you, but look at how many squadrons and how many admirals the Royal Navy has going around the world. Yes, they're stretched, but they're not crying. And in the nicest way, what you'd have probably found yourself running into would have been Calder's squadron, Nelson's squadron, all kind of combined up with Cornwallis's fleet. You would probably be looking at the best part of 50 to 60 ships line. Yes, you probably would have slightly more in numbers, but you'd again be against Cornwallis and Nelson and Collingwood, and Calder, for all his faults, would have been fine in that group because he'd have just had to follow someone else. Someone else would have been making decisions, he'd have just been executing, and he was a very good executor. He'd have also probably had Strachan's group there as well, because if you're forming that larger fleet together, they're not going to worry about your small squadrons sailing around. Not until they dealt with it. You might have even found, and it's going to sound really strange, Keith and his squadron, which were supposed to be watching the Dutch, might have left a small group watching the Dutch as a bluff, signalling and looking like there's a far bigger fleet over the horizon, and brought the bulk of his squadron down the channel as quick as he could to reinforce the channel fleet. And who knows how many ships the RN would have thrown at sea. But anyway, eventually, good old Villeneuve hears that Rossely's coming down to replace him, and so he decides to go to sea on the 20th of October. On 21st of October, 1805, there is the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, I'm going to do a live on the Battle of Trafalgar later today. There is a link to the live down below. There's going to be a long patrol actually on the battle itself. So I am not going to talk about the battle that much. But I'm going to use an example of the scenario they're facing. Because look at this. There is the Royal Navy formed up in roughly two lines, sailing against the Spanish and the French combined fleet, firing. That takes a lot of courage and a lot of skill to be able to do. Especially when you pretty much, the wind isn't necessarily going to be your best friend, because it isn't necessarily giving you the best angle of approach. But look at the top. That's HMS Africa. While the battle is actually going on, there are more Royal Navy ships arriving. There is another ship of the line. Not the world's biggest ship of the line, but not a bad one either. Arriving. The Royal Navy has that much depth of force that they can be doing this. That ships can be arriving, forming up, joining in the battle. Doesn't hesitate. Doesn't think, oh, where should I go? It doesn't question orders. Doesn't need those orders. Doesn't need a prescription from an admiral of what to do, or prescription from Napoleon of what to do. The captain of HMS Africa, Henry Digby, has got a brand new ship, pretty much. She'd been on reconfigured a 64-gun vessel between September 1804 and July 1805, which is pretty much its dramatic rebuild. He has had this ship for, well, basically mid-July, August, September, October. It's 21st of October. So we can honestly say probably not more 3 months. He has drilled that crew and trained them up. Settled them down. And he has no hesitation about what he's going to do. She sails along the French and Spanish fleet, delivering broadsides. One ship sailing down the line solo. Doesn't even hesitate. Doesn't demur. Doesn't think, oh, I should form up a line. Doesn't. And this is the thing about the Royal Navy at this time. Yes, they have some officers who aren't as good as the others, but the vast majority have so much experience and confidence that they have no qualms. Digby had not been at the Council of War. He hadn't heard Nelson say, "He who places himself next to the enemy and fires will do right by me." He had not seen the signal of England expects. None of that. But he didn't need that. They were following a fighting admiral who was leading them into a fight. They were going to fight. If you can go back to the Battle of Cape Finisterre, HMS Malta has a fighting captain. She's surrounded by 5 ships. She captures 2 of them. She drives the other 3 off. By the time anyone called her notices and sends something to support her, she's already got herself out of that situation. This is the ultimate problem for Napoleon. As hardened and as experienced as his army was on land, the Royal Navy was at sea. By this point, the French fleet was not what it had been. The Royal Navy was still sailing a lot, doing a lot of the work, doing all the work which keeps a fleet going. They were doing gunnery practice. You can do those far more easily at sea than you can in a harbour. People tend to not like you firing cannon at them in a harbour, so you tend to have to go to sea for it. And you keep your firing rate up far higher. You get far more sailing practice. You get far more experience working as a team. You have far less distractions. In harbour, you have to deal with officers going ashore and men trying to sneak ashore to go and have dalliances with ladies and pubs and all those sort of things. And always the issues of maybe a privateer deciding to say, oh, we're recruiting. Well, your crew might desert for that because there's more money there. All sorts of issues. And I might not want to be there in the first place. And let's look at the damage which HMS Africa suffers. This is her taking part in 1808, fighting Danish gunboats. She also will get involved in the War of 1812. That she's part of the squadron under Sir Philip Broke that fails to catch USS Constitution, because USS Constitution looks at the squadron and goes, I can take you, I can take you. That one's called Africa. We all know that one story from the Battle of Trafalgar. I'm getting out of here. No, seriously, Constitution is a good sailing ship, and it goes, hang on, I can outsail these ships. I'm not going to outfight them. But yeah, Africa is a bit of a war spite of her time. There are quite a lot of interesting battles she finds herself into. Cuddalore, of course, more famously, but a few other interesting one-on-one ship actions. This is her after the battle. Okay, this is her after Trafalgar. She's being she's being towed off shoals by HMS Conqueror, because 3 days after the battle, she still needs help. They're still fixing bits of her, because that is how much damage she takes during the action. But also how much damage she gives. And you can see from her plans up the top there, she's a well-designed little ship. She has 64 guns, a lower deck with 26 24-pounders, an upper deck with 26 18-pounders, quarter deck with 10 4-pounders, and a forecastle with 2 9-pounders. I always find it fun that she has 4-pounder guns. They are cute little cannon. But they're actually surprisingly potent, and there's a reason they're on the quarterdeck. Because if you load those 4-pounders with grape shot, you can clear a deck very quickly. And the cycle of fire you can achieve a 4-pounder gun because of its size is very quick. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She's a good ship. And she's fairly new. She said she is launched in 1781, commissioned not that long afterwards. She'd be broken up in May 1814. So she only has a career of 33 odd years. But she does a lot of hard sailing in those 33 odd years. So what happens after Battle of Trafalgar? Well, Nelson has died. And the French and Spanish split up. The Spanish try and get some prizes, but honestly, the storm causes much damage to the British fleet. The storm after Trafalgar caused much damage to the British fleet as the battle did. But the British fleet and the surviving French prizes put in Gibraltar not that long afterwards. Rear Admiral Pierre de Moore tried to escape. He headed north with 4 French ships, hoping to reach Rochefort. On the 2nd of November, they came across our old friend, HMS Phoenix, some 40 miles off Cape Ortegal. And this is where they do the most stupid thing. This is HMS Phoenix. First thing you should never do. They chased her. And this time, well, she wasn't luring them away from a convoy. No. She took them to meet the squadron of 5 ships in the line under Captain Sir Richard Strachan. And this is not a good scenario for the French. Baker has some good ships with him. He has HMS Caesar, his own 3rd rate, an 80-gun vessel. He has HMS Hero, a 74-gun vessel. Also, recently of course, the Battle of Cape Finisterre. HMS Courageous, another 3rd rate, 74-gun. HMS Namur, 74-gun. HMS Santa Margarita. Well, she's a very good 36-gun vessel. HMS Eos, 32-gun. Phoenix, of course, 36-gun. And HMS Revolutionaire, 38-gun. You might be noticing a theme here. There are courageous is spelt with an X on the end. I'm not gonna suggest that there are a few ships here which might have recently changed hands, but they had certainly changed hands. In contrast, Dumois has Formidable, his 3rd rate. Scipion, 3rd rate. Dugoin, a 3rd rate. And Mont Blanc, a 3rd rate. 74. 3 74s and an 80-gun. So, theoretically, they match in as equal. Both sides have 3 74s and an 80-gun. However, this tells you what happens at this battle. Formidable, commissioned as HMS Brave. Scipion, commissioned as HMS Scipion. Duguay Turin, commissioned as HMS Implacable. Mont Blanc, commissioned as HMS Mont Blanc. Pretty much, it was not a long battle. Begins at 5:40 a.m. in the morning of the 4th of November. and is all over by 3:35 p.m. It's a complete loss. And this is the point of this whole campaign, really. The Trafalgar campaign, the Battle of Trafalgar, is of course what's remembered, but the whole campaign is one of wonderful looking plans on paper, execution terrible. I'm not saying the French can't execute a decent plan. They can probably. They could probably. But they don't manage to. They don't manage to for a variety of reasons, but mostly they don't have the ships. They don't have the crews. And when I say this, what do I mean by they don't have the ships? They build ships which are very fast. They build ships which are very refined. They build ships which are incredibly complicated to use. Time and time again, you will read books which will tell you the French build their ships according to the highest scientific principles. They do all this work and development in them, and they come up with these great designs, and they do. Time and time again, those ships end up getting best use of by the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy has the experienced crews who can make use of them. But the Royal Navy, when they're building their own ships, don't think about building the most complicated and most advanced ship. They think about what building the best ship for what they need. The French build a ship to be fast. The British build a ship to be tough. British ships tend to be not as fast getting to places, but in a far better condition when they get there, and far better for the fight. French ships look good on paper. They look really good on paper. Gorgeous on paper. The most famous memory of the battle of the campaign, Nelson dying. The way it's imagined, the reality and the myth. And this again is the reality of this campaign. The myth of the campaign is all about the Battle of Trafalgar. But really, the far more interesting thing is how you end up with the Battle of Trafalgar in the first place. You have this slapstick comedy of Nelson chasing Villeneuve around the world and keep coming almost within moments of touching him, moments of finding him. And the whole time you have Napoleon sitting at home going, "Oh, if only you follow my plans, I will win." But will he? Will he? There is a lot of assumptions made about Napoleon. One of them is that if he does get his army to England, he will win. I'm less inclined to that one because I think that army, even crossing the Channel, especially if they're trying to do it in 6 hours, Channel is not the smoothest, calmest patch of water in the world. They're going to be pretty seasick. Depending on where they arrive, they're going to find British troops waiting for them, already organised and ordered up, and with a command structure in place and dug in. So they're going to have to go straight into a fight. And if they're crossing the Channel, what's the odds that even if they have beaten the Channel Fleet out of the way, or managed to dodge the Channel Fleet, how long before another Royal Navy squadron turns up? Will they get all their people off? Or will the ship suddenly have a Royal Navy squadron sailing in, going bang, bang, bang with their cannon? Because ships, if they're close to shore, offloading, even if they're covering barges, they're not able to. They've not got the freedom of maneuver. And those barges, I haven't seen a good quality picture of them, but the descriptions of them do not bear thinking about in terms of something you want to go to see in. So this is the reality we're talking about. The Battle of Trafalgar, it's the myth and the reality of the campaign. It's not. It's the culmination. It's the decisive moment. But in many ways, it's as decisive as it is because of things which don't happen. At no point does Villeneuve actually push for Brest. So you don't have the big battle in Quiberon Bay, etc., that you would have had with Cornwallis in charge, because that's who would have been in charge. I'm sorry to anyone who's a Nelsonic fanboy. Admiral of the white, blue or white, outranks Vice Admiral of the white. He does. Nelson would have been senior, probably second in command, and more likely would have been there. But that doesn't happen. Calder has an opportunity. He could have pushed. It could have been a far bigger battle, a far more push battle. He has several advantages. He doesn't, because he's a very conservative admiral. He's prepared to fight for a win. He's prepared to fight to drive off the enemy rather than fight for a win. And he captures, thanks to HMS Malta. And I think in many ways he's shocked at how quickly he loses control of his fleet and how quickly it descends into a melee. And he isn't prepared for that. He doesn't. That worries him. And honestly, I'd have thought a melee was the better option for him. If you're the way to neutralize the enemy's numbers to make sure they can't concentrate on you, and breaking them up into smaller chunks so they're all chasing their tails. But no, you almost have a battle in the West Indies. If Nelson had gone north from Barbados rather than south, the odds are he would have caught Villeneuve at Antigua, if not earlier. Which means we could be talking about this the battle in the Caribbean. Trafalgar is a decisive battle. I would say it's not the first overly decisive battle. There's also Quiberon Bay. There's a few others as well which can fit up there. Camperdown is pretty decisive and pretty emphatic. Copenhagen, pretty emphatic as well. But it's got a luster and a lure because of this. Because of Nelson's sacrifice. Because the great admiral, the great, in many ways, self-publicist, but deservedly so in some regards, an admiral who was beloved by his sailors because he did practical things for them, like fought for, made sure they got food, which was the same approach as Jervis and Cornwallis had used. They were all hard taskmasters, but they also looked after them. And he dies in his battle. He wins a decisive victory, and he dies. That is why it becomes a myth. And it doesn't provide 100 years of naval superiority. It provides 100 years of confidence in British naval superiority, not a reality of naval superiority. There's still the War of 1812. There's still all sorts of things. And as for unquestioned Pax Britannia, again, no. But ultimately, you have a Vice Admiral the White with a Vice Admiral the Blue. No, Vice Admiral the White with a Rear Admiral the Blue, following one at a time. He gets promoted quite quickly afterwards. Fighting what turns out to be the most important battle of the campaign because of the result it achieves. And not because, honestly, Napoleon was still capable of launching his attack. He wasn't. Napoleon was nowhere near capable at that point. He was having to deal with, well, the Holy Roman Empire mainly, and their advancing armies. Oh, well. So, live soon. Hope you enjoyed.